So we're going to talk about what's going on in the Congress, what's going on with FDA, what's going on in the Second Circuit Court in New York, and some of the timelines for expected changes we might see. In Congress, we've got two things going on. We've got what's been going on for a long time with the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act, or PAMTA. It was first introduced by Senator Ted Kennedy many years ago, and in 2007, Louise Slaughter, who is a congresswoman from New York, picked up the mission and has been moving it forward ever since. After Senator Kennedy died, Dianne Feinstein from California has picked it up in the Senate. What PAMTA would do is would ban what they call routine uses of antibiotics in animals of medically important drugs. And they consider medically important drugs any class that is also used in human medicine. PAMTA is not moving. It had a hearing several years ago in the House when Mrs. Slaughter was head of the Rules Committee. They haven't been able to find a vehicle to attach it to, and moving a bill by itself that is this narrowly focused would be very difficult. So PAMTA right now, at least in the 112th Congress that will go through into December, maybe even the first week in January, is likely not going to go anywhere. In the 113th Congress, which will start after the inauguration, we have a vehicle that PAMTA might be hooked to, or they might try to hook it to, call it germane, that this is something that should move together. And that's ADUFA. And ADUFA allows FDA to attach or collect user fees from sponsor companies. And those user fees are focused at FDA being able to hire reviewers to expedite reviews. So instead of taking 300 days to answer a letter, they might only take 150 days to answer a letter or answer a request. When ADUFA needs to be reauthorized every 5 years. It was first enacted in 2003, reauthorized in 2008, and now is up for reauthorization in 2013. In 2008, the animal health sponsor companies, FDA, did their negotiations, came up with what they agreed upon for user fees attached with ADUFA, and then it came to the floor of the Congress, and people wanted to attach a lot of things to it, including they tried to attach PAMTA to it. The thing that got attached was antibiotic use reporting. And what that required was that the animal health sponsors report how much of a certain product they sold, whether it was to distributors or direct to producers, but that the sponsor company sold during the calendar year. They used to report them on the anniversary of when that product was licensed. So now we have calendar year sales being reported. What's happened is that the advocates who wanted use data have realized that this really isn't very helpful because you don't know at what dose those products were used, into what species of animals they went, for what indications. So I know it's been well signaled from the advocacy groups that come 2013, we're going to have some legislative fights on trying to attach additional reporting language to ADUFA, or else FDA may also look at additional reporting otherwise. I think I just already said all of this. One of the things that's a little concerning as we look at FDA asking for additional data on antibiotic use reporting is that they think that they can tie antibiotic use data that they might collect to trends they would see in the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring System, irregardless of how much noise there is between those two systems, where it's going to be highly unlikely that one set of data will support changes in another set of data. Right now, there's a Federal Register notice out. Comments are due on the 25th, asking not only about comments on ADUFA, but comments on additional sources of data FDA could use to try to estimate or model antibiotic use. We've got some people really wanting to not only use legislative processes, but Mrs. Slaughter has taken a page book from what we're seeing in animal welfare and gone out and used her position as a very powerful member of Congress to ask food companies, retailers and restaurants, and even some packers and processors about antibiotic use in the products that they produce and sell. And she since reported those results, and there was a variety of results to the we buy animals on the open market, have no idea other than that people are PQA plus certified, all the way up to the Whole Foods and others that have a program for antibiotic-free products in their meat case. And so Mrs. Slaughter's made hay from it. I love the name of the food poisoning bulletin. They also shared Mrs. Slaughter's results. It hasn't moved as far as some of the welfare issues, and I think in part because there's still a strong FDA regulatory system in charge of antibiotic use on farms, unlike the fact that there is no perceived regulatory structure for animal welfare on farms. So that's what's been going on in Congress and the push to the marketplace. Regulatory activities are where we're really seeing quite a few changes. And we've found stories in the last few months about what FDA is doing to tighten rules on antibiotic use in livestock. This is from the New York Times. It was not a particularly flattering story. It was kind of like the too little, too late. But what's really happening is that in April, FDA, which regulates all antibiotics for animals as well as humans, issued what they called their final guidance for industry number 209. They also issued a draft guidance number 213, and we'll go through what's in each of these. And then they did an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on the veterinary feed directive. One of the things to understand is a guidance for industry is not a guideline. A lot of the lay press would say FDA issued voluntary guidelines. A guidance is how a regulatory agency expects to conduct business, and unless you challenge that guidance in court, that is how the regulatory agency will conduct business. So it basically is treated as if it has the force of law unless it is legally challenged. And I guess I would say that when they talk about voluntary guidelines, when you're talking about the regulatory agency that allows you as a pharmaceutical company to stay in business, voluntary is relative. Especially when they finished up in their guidelines saying, and if you don't voluntarily comply, we will take action under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act authorities we have. So what Guidance for Industry did, 209 did, and this was a couple years ago when it was first published as a draft, is it said two very important things. It said that growth promotion and nutritional efficiency uses of antibiotics that are in classes also used in human medicine or considered medically important under Guidance 152, that those uses, those production uses, so we coined a new term, production uses, are injudicious. Injudicious is a regulatory genius discovered that word. If FDA had called these uses unsafe, they would be required by law to take action under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to withdraw those products. So they couldn't call them unsafe. They said they're injudicious. There is no regulatory definition for injudicious, so it means they can do whatever they want to correct the injudicious position that they see. The other thing that was very important in 209 is they said disease prevention, disease control, and disease treatment are all therapeutic uses that are essential for protecting animal health, and we will protect those uses. So they made the advocates mad by saying prevention and control is acceptable, and they made production people unhappy by saying growth promotion needs to go away. They also said that any of these uses also that are left over after the injudicious uses go away need to be under veterinary oversight. So then in April when they published 213 is their roadmap for how they will implement that Guidance 209, how they will correct the injudicious categories. So they're voluntarily working with the sponsors to discontinue production claims. Again, voluntary is relative. There was concern if a sponsor came up and said, we will give up our growth promotion claim, that if that then meant they'd have to open the file for that product, that you could have other risks to that product. So they're working on figuring out with the sponsors how they could voluntarily give up those production claims. They're also looking at how you would migrate to either a VFD or an RX label, because their Guidance 209 was not just for feed-grade antibiotics, it was also for water medications. So realize that water meds that are in those same categories that they consider important to human health they would expect those to migrate to a prescription only. And then also in 213 were steps that a sponsor company could take if they felt that growth promotion doses were really preventing disease. What's the data you would have to present to FDA to say we want to use this same dose and call it disease prevention? What I'd say from our little grapevine that I've been involved in, we don't really have any good, there's not a lot of good gossip about this as to who might be looking at migrating claims from a growth promotion to a disease prevention. I think we've got a pretty good idea that a lot of the companies will likely look at moving away from the growth promotion nutritional efficiency claims. So what's the timeline? In 213, FDA has asked, after the 213 is published as a final guidance, it's right now out there as a draft, they've accepted comments, they're going to read the comments, they'll publish it as final anywhere usually from 9 to 12 months after the April draft was issued. So after it's published as final, they want the sponsor companies to come in and meet with them within 3 months. And within 3 years, they would like all the changes to be implemented. That's giving up labels, moving to VFD or RX, any research. And they very clearly state, if you don't come in voluntarily, we will take action under our authorities granted by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. So what's it really mean? The way I see it is that most growth promotion uses and those dosages of those antibiotics that are used in human medicine will likely end within 3 to 4 years. We looked at what isn't considered medically important. We could come up with carbadox, bacitracin, flavomycin, and Denagard were the 4 products that don't appear on that medically important list for Guidance 152. We know that Denagard's already voluntarily given up their growth promotion claim, but those would be the drugs that would perhaps be able to keep a growth promotion claim and not be required to go VFD under the strict guidance 213 and 209. We don't know what those companies may voluntarily do, but they would be excluded from being medically important. They also, to have veterinary oversight, FDA is looking at things moving VFD. We met with them to try to come up with more creative ways to demonstrate veterinary oversight, and they didn't get real creative. So that's where we're at. So the VFD also, like we said, all these antibiotics that are in classes used in human medicine need to be under veterinary oversight. So I would say FDA is very anxious to make the VFD changes workable. And so in the advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, they've laid out what they would expect a veterinary feed directive order to look like now. And instead of having to write it for every batch of pigs for a certain number of tons of feed, the way it's written now is you could write a VFD with a 6-month expiration date for a specific production site, and you'd need dose, duration, number of refills listed under that VFD. You'd need the approximate number of animals treated, not the tons of feed as it currently is. You can email or fax VFD forms, so FDA is not requiring that the feed mill have originals. Records would be retained for 12 months instead of the current 2 years. And they did decouple it from the veterinary client-patient relationship. So it says a veterinarian who in the course of their clinical practice could then write a VFD. So you don't have to demonstrate a VCPR. Now that may vary state to state because certain state pharmacy boards may have different interpretation of what it's required to write a VFD. So legal challenges, we'll get into this quick because this kind of is, well, if FDA doesn't voluntarily get all this stuff, we've also got what's going on in the Second Circuit Court in New York. National Resources Defense Council, NRDC, and other members of the Keep Antibiotics Working Group brought suit against FDA, and they came up with 2 complaints. One was that in 1977, FDA opened up a notice of opportunity of hearing for subtherapeutic uses of penicillin and tetracycline. The NOOH is the first step FDA would take to withdraw an unsafe product from the market. And they offer this opportunity of hearing for the sponsor companies to come in and provide data that would demonstrate that their product really is safe, and so FDA shouldn't withdraw it. That notice of opportunity of hearing has been open since 1977. There was some congressional pressure around it. There was some reluctance on FDA to continue that. There was a lot of data that was brought forward. But because they never closed the NOOH, NRDC brought suit that they needed to move forward on that. And they also had, the second part of the lawsuit says, FDA did not respond to petitions that citizens had brought forward to them to discontinue the use of all subtherapeutic antibiotics. So what happened is FDA lost. It was being tried in one of the most liberal courts in New York. It was expected FDA lost. And so FDA has actually appealed both of those processes. They've closed the notice of opportunities of hearing, and they've rejected the citizens' petitions. And so that was FDA's first step. And so Judge Catz, who is now retired, and I don't know what the new judge will be, but Judge Catz in his second opinion on this issue required FDA to go back and reevaluate the citizens' petitions, not just deny them. And they also have come up with a timeline. So the court has told FDA, according to this blog, that you can't delay on protecting people against antibiotic overuse in factory farms. So when FDA appealed the original decision, they asked for a delay on holding any of these hearings. And what happened is Judge Catz came back and said, you can't slow this up while you wait for the appeal. You must complete the hearing process within 5 years. I'm sorry, I missed the 5 on that slide. So I think they have 3 years to hold the hearings and another 2 years to come up with or 3 years to start the hearings, another 2 years to complete the hearings and come up with a decision. So FDA has agreed with that, but if you look at that timeline fits pretty nicely with what they're expecting to accomplish under their voluntary withdrawals on 209 and 213. So what's the final next steps? Guidance 209 is final. We're not going to get away from FDA saying subtherapeutic growth promotion use is injudicious and that we need veterinary oversight. Guidance 213 is draft. We expect it'll be about 12 months from April when it was published to complete that. And the VFD was considered codified language. I think will be probably approximately another 9 or 12 months from April when it was published to see a draft proposed rule. And then you probably open it up again for comments until maybe another 9 to 12 months. So it could be 2 years before we see a final rule on what a VFD would look like. The one thing FDA is doing is that they're working with AVMA and USDA to understand implications, especially to small producers in remote areas. So they're going to hold some listing sessions. I think our sponsor companies are busy evaluating their options. And in my opinion, our end result is that whether it comes from legal challenges, regulatory challenges, or perhaps the marketplace is over the next 3 to 5 years, the availability of producers to access certain antimicrobials for certain uses without a veterinary prescription or veterinary oversight